Welcome to Stand in the Gap Today with your host, the Honorable Sam Rohrer, President of the American Pastors Network, addressing the most pressing issues impacting our economy, our homes, our churches, our culture, and our daily lives from a biblical and constitutional perspective. Stand in the Gap Today, transforming the culture one heart at a time.
Well, just a short time ago, the Arizona Christian University Press announced the release of their latest book entitled Helping Millennials Thrive, Practical Wisdom for a Generation in Crisis. And in this book, written by our friend and regular guest who's with Isaac and me today on the program here on Stand in the Gap Today, is George Barna. And in this book is contained some of the most essential findings of past pertinent research, a lot of which has been shared on this program in various forms, but it was conducted by Arizona Christian University and the Research Cultural Institute there that George leads. And then George has taken and analyzed that and compiled it into what really is I would say, a mine of great treasure. So today, Isaac and I are going to talk with George about this book, why it was written, and then analyze 4 different focuses of information that are revealed in the book. And we're going to address each of these kind of like, here's a problem, what's the cause, what's the solution. We like that approach. George likes that approach, and it really is a very logical way to deal with issues that are of importance. And we're going to do that today. Now, the title of this program, I've entitled it the same as the book title, and that is Helping Millennials Thrive, Practical Wisdom for a Generation in Crisis. And with that, George, thanks for being back with Isaac and I today. It's always a thrill to have you on here. It's always good information. It's very practical. So anyways, thanks for being back with us.
Well, thanks so much. I always look forward to being with you guys because, you do good interviews. You do your homework, and it's always a good conversation, so I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate that from the comment of a good guest because we always think you do your homework. That's why we love to have you back, George. So it's a mutual admiration society here.
Yay.
But I also know this, and I will say this, that our listeners always look forward to and comment on the value of the program that we do because of the application of this interest of what you share. So let's get right into it. Titles are important. We title this program important. We title it today just what you titled the book. But let me go here if this regard, because you say helping millennials thrive. That's a very positive aspect. But then you say the second part, practical wisdom for a generation in crisis, which tells me we've got a problem. Yeah, a crisis problem. So let's start with the big picture first, if you don't mind. A generation in crisis. What generation are we going to be talking about, and to what degree is it actually a crisis?
Well, yeah, it's a good starting point. When we talk about millennials, the way that we're defining them are people who were born between 1984 and 2002. Which, if you do the quick math, what that means is these are people who currently are somewhere in the range from about 21 years of age to 39 years of age. It's an important group for a number of reasons, and among those are the fact that, first of all, they're the largest generation in America's history numerically. Secondly, they're our primary parenting generation. And then thirdly, when you look at the employment core of America, they have the greatest number of employees in the marketplace. So this is a very important group to understand. Now, why do we say that they're in crisis? Because as we did these interviews with a national sample of millennials, what we found is that basically life just is not working for them. When we looked at issues related to employment, related to parenting, related to their sense of belonging or community, related to the lifestyle that they're living, related to their health, their emotional health, their physical health, their mental health. What we found is that the large segments of this population, this generation, says, you know what, that's not working for me. You put it all together, and basically what you've got is a generation in crisis because I'm not saying they're failing. They're saying about themselves that they're failing in life. life is not giving them what they want it to. Life is not providing what they want it to. They're not able to do in life what they were hoping to do. And so they're really struggling on so many dimensions.
And you studied this and worked with them. And again, when you do these surveys, this isn't George Barna thinks this. This is you're asking and they're telling you what the problems are. And that's what's so eye-opening and so helpful about this research, so helpful about this book. But you actually kind of have four main projects, areas of this that are under crisis, these four crises. And the first one is relationships, which maybe is surprising to some people that a group of people who have grown up with social media have relationship problems. But can you talk about the area and the need for wisdom in this area of relationships with millennials?
Yeah, sure, Isaac. I mean, when we looked at the data here, what we found is that this is a group that really believes relationships are important. But they also came back and told us, but I don't really have good, strong, deep, trustworthy, lasting relationships. It's something they want, something they haven't figured out how to unlock yet. And so what's happening is they're beset by this fluid universe of relationships. You're my friend today, you're not my friend tomorrow. And as we looked at it, what we discovered is that a lot of it has to do with how they're coming at this whole dimension of relationships. They have extraordinary expectations and demands of other people, expectations and demands of others that they don't have for themselves in the domain of those relationships. They've got very low levels of trust toward other people. Part of this, we discovered, is due to their own insecurity with who they are, with the kind of life that they're leading. And part of it is their desire for safety. And at some point, hearing something or experiencing something with someone that causes them to think, oh my goodness, that's not a safe person. I'm dropping them from my circle of friends. Part of it has to do with their attitudes. They want people to be tolerant of them, but they're not very tolerant of other people. They basically tell us, you can be my friend as long as you believe and say and do the same things that I do. There's not a lot of room for growth or experiencing alternatives. And they don't have much respect for other people either. They tell us, I'm not going to give you respect. You better earn it, which, of course, is a difficult way to go about making friends. And so we also looked at the fact that whenever they find somebody who they think is going to raise conflict in the relationship, they avoid that person because they don't want to get involved in that conflict, which is difficult because in every relationship you're going to have conflict. What you've got to do is figure out how do you resolve that conflict. And so, part of this goes back to their selfishness, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later on. But this is a generation that suffers from narcissism. They think everything revolves around them. Everybody needs to cater to their needs, their desires, their whims, their beliefs, their behaviors. And that's a tough way to develop a sense of community.
It is indeed, George. And ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. I'm talking, Isaac and I are talking today to George Barna, and a new book that he and the Arizona Christian University has come out with is called Helping Millennials Thrive, Practical Wisdom for a Generation in Crisis. We're going to proceed through four, but I'm going to come back and ask him a question about this relationship issue and how these millennials got there. How did they develop this crisis? And then we're going to move into the second area of millennials and mental health.
From the time our children are born until the moment they leave our homes as young adults, Christian parents are given the privilege and responsibility of guiding them into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. All during their growing years, they're influenced by the people and events around them. Sometimes these are out of our control, but many times we can make choices as to how they'll be educated, what church they'll attend, and the overall atmosphere of our home. If you've decided your child is best influenced by a biblical worldview education, you'll want to consider BJU Press homeschool materials. Dedicated to academic excellence, BJU Press offers a curriculum that not only assists you to pass along your values to your children, but makes it easy and affordable. The decisions made in response to the challenges and opportunities your child will face in life are largely determined by their internal spiritual compass. Is your child ready for the journey? Find out more at bjupress.com. That's bjupress.com.
For years, faithful Christians formed nonprofit foundations or trusts to preserve their ability to generously give to their favorite causes or ministries, even after their death. The problem? Professional managers, pressure from left-wing agendas, and even family members with opposing views hijacked the original donor intent. This is sad but true. But this subversion of purpose can be prevented. Hello, I'm Sam Rohr of the American Pastors Network, and I'm glad to recommend Capstone Legacy Foundation in Wayne, Pennsylvania, an experienced and capable Christian community foundation. Established to help you set up a ministry, a giving structure guaranteed not to be hijacked, or a place you can donate cash or non-cash assets like stocks, bonds, or property. Capstone's designed to help you achieve immediate tax savings and give you needed time to decide how to prayerfully allocate your giving. Contact Capstone at 610-688-8890 or visit them at capstonelegacy.org.
With a 1-minute look at culture from a Christian worldview, I'm John Stonestreet with A Point. Recently in The Atlantic, Jason Heller described how he and his wife took back their Sundays. Quote, although Angie and I aren't religious, we really do think of our secular day of rest as sacred. That's why we take pains to protect it, even when it means turning down career opportunities or the next week being a little more stressful. When you take away all the tasks you might feel pressed to do on a Sunday, what you're left with isn't an absence, it's an opening, end quote. Well, that idea shouldn't be revolutionary. Not that long ago, in most American communities, most places were closed on Sundays. These days, finding rest even one day a week can feel like an uphill battle. The frenzied pace of modernity desacralizes the created order and everyday life. But our best attempts only collide with reality as God designed it. God himself rested. He told us to do likewise. His rules aren't random. They're actually baked into creation, and that includes Sabbath. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet.
In a recent interview regarding Christian education, my guest noted that the most important question to measure the success of a graduating senior is, do they end up loving the Lord God with all their heart and mind and soul? This is the ultimate success indicator to build into the next generation. Hello, I'm Sam Rohr with another Stand in the Gap Minute. This week I've presented the importance of training up our children in the way they should go. This impact includes living out our faith, teaching the scriptures to our children and grandchildren, and answering their tough questions. But the most important commandment remains: love the Lord your God. You see, we tend to focus on our child's GPA or athletic or art accomplishments, but God looks at the heart. Let's emphasize most what He expects most. Do they love God? That question should be our greatest objective for the next generation, our nation, and for our own lives. Discover more at AmericanPastorsNetwork.net.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today. For more information, visit our website at standinthegapradio.com.
Now, reading from a release from the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University in regard to the book that we're talking about here, I'm just going to read to you just some of what they say. They quote, initial findings from Barna's research revealed that millennials are grappling with existential crises in 4 defining areas of life. Relationships, just talked about that just briefly. Mental health, going to talk about that next. Meaning and purpose in the 3rd segment, and faith. Now, specifically going on, the release says, millennials find it difficult to trust others and often go out of their way to avoid relational conflict. A majority of them struggle with mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, or fear, and they acknowledge some degree of emotional fragility or even mental illness. 3/4, still reading from the release, 3/4 of millennials are searching for meaning and purpose in their lives. And a record-breaking 40% of young adults identify as don'ts. That's do-nots, don'ts, claiming that they don't believe, know, or care whether God exists, end quote. So it's in these areas that we're going to examine more in detail in this segment and the 2 to follow. But before we get into this one on mental health, George, can we go back and just, I want to pick up that question you're talking about, relationships we brought up, that Isaac brought up in the last segment, and that is this. if that fear exists, not if, since that fear exists to the level that you described, the logical question is, what was it about this culture, the parents of the millennials, let's put it there, or whatever, what contributed to this extraordinary fear of relationships that appear to be so shallow, as you described in that last segment? How'd they get to that point?
Well, as you know, Sam, I mean, when people are developing, there's a combination of factors that influence who we become. And so as we tear that apart and try to figure out, how do we get here, a lot of it has to do with media influence, to be honest. When you look at the television programs, the movies, the video games, the music they listen to, a lot of that suggested that people are there for your use. And so it wasn't that we assigned value to every human being as God might, but instead it was, if you can use them, do so. If they're of no benefit to you, discard them, move on. And so there's a low value assigned to human life. We saw that in other aspects of the survey as well, where we talked with them about, does human life have value? And for the most part, a majority of them said no. It's not something that's sacred. You create value by who you make yourself and how you comport yourself. Completely unbiblical view, but that's part of what's holding them back. But then you also look at what their parents brought to the equation, and to a large extent, as they observed their parents' relationships, they noted that if they had any, they tended to be fleeting, they tended to be superficial. And then when they looked at, for instance, the most important relationship that they would be able to observe up front, up close, that of their parents, this is a generation that had the largest proportion ever that divorced. And so they were often in the midst of conflict. And that was something that they didn't want to see, intruding into their own relationships with people. Then you talk about the other influence, their peers. Those are individuals their own age with many of the same similar experiences. They're coming in with the same kind of high expectations and high demands that the individuals we talk to have. So naturally, there's going to be conflict and confrontation and challenges in developing bridges, relational bridges with those people. And then you look at the other big influence, that of schools. And schools probably 3, maybe 4 decades ago stopped investing in the concept of building community. Because they say, oh, that's too value-laden, and we don't do values here, which is nonsense. They do values, but they don't do it well. They don't do it intentionally and strategically and appropriately. But so you've got what's left is a bunch of school kids coming out without knowing how to develop relationships, how to resolve conflict, how to communicate effectively with each other, how to share, how to do all the things that a healthy relationship relies upon.
And that seems to be leading to this other crisis that Sam just mentioned with the mental health. And again, reading from the book, the release from your book, a majority of them, millennials, struggle with mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, or fear, and they acknowledge some degree of emotional fragility or even mental illness. And you've talked about this on our program before, back when you were in the middle of some of this research, and then full disclosure, I was on a panel with you. So we've talked about this to some degree, but the facts that really are kind of frightening is this is them self-disclosing this. So there are some people, many people, and I've worked in the area of mental health. There are many people that have mental health struggles. I see it as a pastor. I've seen it as a social worker. I've seen it as a school teacher, that a lot of people do not want to admit their mental health struggles. You're talking about these numbers here, and these are numbers of millennials that freely admit to it. So the real number could even be greater than this. But how big of an issue are we looking at? What kind of a plague, or really, are we looking at the research is showing us with this generation?
I mean, the magnitude, Isaac, is staggering, because we're talking about 54% who admitted to often feeling anxious or depressed or fearful. And then looking at their behaviors and their lifestyle, what we see is that kind of anxiety, depression, fear, whatever it may be, is holding them back from doing many of the things that they'd want to do, that they need to do, that they've been trained or educated to do. And so it creates a kind of a cycle where they just go deeper and deeper into themselves, feeling worse about themselves and their life, feeling like there's no way out, like they don't have the skills to dig their way out of the problem, like nobody understands it and is giving them the kind of support and solace that they need to make progress. And, so low self-confidence, low self-esteem, all of these kinds of things just keep building on themselves to the point where they feel like, it's all pretty hopeless, which is how then we wind up with the extraordinarily high suicide rates in that particular generation.
Logical question I'm going to follow up here, same as the one before. How did this come upon this generation? Was it because they had their parents, as you said, greatest divorce generation? Did they see no stability? Have they created false expectations that are unrealistic because of media that you've mentioned? Or how did they get to that point? And then before this before this segment comes to an end, provide some wisdom or solution provided in the book, if there is, in fact, hope for this condition.
There's always hope because Jesus lives, and I mean, he's the source of all hope, and if we're willing to pay attention to the principles he gave us, there's always hope. These problems came about for all the same kind of reasons I was talking about before regarding relationships. Again, the media creates situations of fear. I mean, you can't tell me that kids will watch so many horror movies and then face life without any fears. You're just pounding the basis of those fears into them. Rap music, hip-hop music, other forms of music, dwelling on the negative, the dark side, the anger, the lack of value of humanity. All of those things. You keep pounding it home day after day, hour after hour. It takes a toll on a person. It changes and it shapes and changes their worldview. So, what do we do about this kind of situation? I mean, what we've got to do is basically go back to basics. When I say that Jesus is the hope, okay, well, how do I know what he wants me to do? He loved us enough. He gave us his words in writing. He knows that we're a bunch of ninnies, so he said, I got to make it as simple as possible. He gave it to us in the Bible. That's what the Bible is, a guidebook for successful living. But you have to be willing to follow the courses of action, the guidelines that we've been given. Starting with, hey, life is not about you. Get over yourself. When you're just focusing on you and your problems and why don't other people care enough and blah, 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 it just goes on and goes deeper and darker. Well, do you understand? Life isn't about you. You are a created being. You were created by a Father in heaven who loves you. He created you for a purpose. Your life is not meaningless, but if you go back to him, he'll show you that purpose. He's prepared you to succeed by giving you gifts and skills and abilities and other resources that are intended for you to use for his purposes, and that ultimately is what's going to give you joy. This is a generation that's hung up on happiness. Happiness isn't going to last because it's an emotion. Joy is something that lasts because it becomes part of the foundation of your life. This is a generation that wants to control everything. Get over it. We have no control. We're basically powerless without Christ living in us and working through us. It's his Holy Spirit that gives us power and authority, nothing else. Not your education, not your ability to communicate, not your good looks, not anything that you've accomplished. That's it. So it really, all these four problems we're going to talk about, I'm going to say they all go back to worldview in the end. And that's what I'm talking about here is let's reshape, let's redevelop, reconsider the worldview, because that's where we've lost progress and momentum, and that's why people don't have the hope. They don't have a biblical worldview.
And ladies and gentlemen, I know if you're listening right to me right now, you're going to say, I've heard a lot of this before. Well, you have, because the problems of this age that people have are very common. So is the solution. Jesus Christ, the Word of God, a biblical worldview. So as complicated as things may seem, there is hope. And that hope is rather simple. Take our hands off of ourselves, put our arms around what Jesus says. We'll be back. God is raising up truth partners with Stand in the Gap from around the nation. Have you responded yet? Ora from Pennsylvania said this: "Thank you and your team for investing your time and energies in sending out the gospel light. I felt God wanting me to be a small part of your great work. My husband and I are seniors and spending most of our time at home. But you've become a feast for our souls on radio and TV. Keep the gospel light shining." And then Karen from California said, "I'm new to Stand in the Gap. So grateful to see and to hear your programs. You guys are a vital link to the practical reality of God's Word as you so effectively weave the intersection of culture with Scripture. Thank you for speaking up for truth and exposing evil." Well, join Ora, Karen, and others, and stand with us at standinthegapradio.com.
The Bible, right or wrong? This is Ken Ham, author of the book on today's culture wars called Divided Nation. Today we're looking at one more ite from the Old Testament, and this time it's the Edomites, Esau's descendants. Now the Bible tells us that kings reigned in Edom before any kings in Israel. But is this true? Well, some archaeologists didn't think so. They thought of Edom as just a simple tribal society. But what happened? Well, you might be able to guess by this point in our series. Archaeologists discovered evidence for a massive copper mining operation in Edom. Now, this would have taken lots of technological know-how. Edom was not a simple society. In other words, yet again, archaeology confirmed the Bible.
Get answers when you visit us at AnswersRadio.com and listen to this program again or the rest of the series when you visit our award-winning website at AnswersRadio.com.
The United States boasts over 4 million miles of highways and public roads. Without accurate maps, though, and road signs, these roads are confusing. The road of life's no different. Thankfully, the Bible gives us needed markers and guidelines in the form of biblical commands and principles. Properly applying them is the difference between success and confusion when it comes to impacting our culture for Christ and being effective salt and light. For a gift of any amount to Stand in the Gap, we'll send you an attractive Stand in the Gap signpost with 4 simple questions and corresponding biblical principles about the toughest issues of the day, helping you to successfully travel the road of life. Use as a bookmark in your Bible, affix to your refrigerator, or give to a friend. Yours for a gift of any amount to Stand in the Gap. Partner with us right now at standinthegapradio.com. That's standinthegapradio.com.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today, discussing the pressing issues facing our culture from a biblical and constitutional perspective. Now let's rejoin our host.
Well, we're midway through the program right now. If you're just joining us, you've missed a lot. But you can go back and pick it up on our website at standinthegapradio.com or on our app, which if you've not downloaded that yet, please do. So many people find that the convenience of the app, just put in the phrase Stand in the Gap, is so helpful, because not always can people always listen to the program at their normal time. But you can go back on your app and listen to it on your time. You can communicate to us. You can give us your thoughts. You can access all of our programs, not just this one Stand in the Gap today, but Stand in the Gap Weekend and Stand in the Gap Minute and our Stand in the Gap TV program that Isaac and I do, and that is aired all over the country. So you can get them all right there, plus a whole lot more. And you can also, and I would like to encourage you to pray about this, but if you've not partnered with us in prayer, please, that's the most important to seriously do that. But also partner with us financially. Take some of that which God has given to you, and if God's blessing you through the program, lay up some treasure in heaven by helping this program and helping us to communicate the kind of truth that is helping you and so many other countless thousands across the country. So perhaps you would consider that, make it a matter of prayer, and then act upon it. So anyways, just enough with that. I'll get back into the program here right now. According to Arizona Christian University Press, in regard to this new book that we're talking about today, Helping Millennials Thrive, Practical Wisdom for a Generation in Crisis, it says this, quote, millennials had no intention of becoming lightning rods for social change. They're largely the product of the unaddressed dysfunctions of the generations that came before them. They've inherited a cultural war, a war zone rather, but not the tools to bring peace to that war. I think that's a really key statement. George goes on to say, we must look upon our youngest adults as a group that we might be able to help navigate through the challenges in which they've immersed themselves. The more we can empower them to champion what matters, to live in ways that will foster human flourishing, the more assured we can be that they'll become the people that God created them to be. And that this great nation can again be ground zero for realistic hope, tangible love and understanding, demonstrable compassion, creativity and innovation, and humble righteousness. End quote. Now, that's a lot wrapped up in that, George. You took some time putting that analysis together, but let's move into, we've talked about relationships, we've talked about mental health and the fears that seem to dominate this large generation of millennials. But the third existential crisis area that you've identified is that of meaning and purpose. And of course, it logically makes sense in light of everything we've been talking about. So how do you define the words meaning and purpose? Because they probably mean different things to different people. But to what extent is this a true, measurable millennial crisis?
Well, Sam, when we give them this in the survey, what we discovered is that 3 out of every 4 millennials say that they're still searching for some kind of compelling purpose or sense of meaning for their life. And so when we look at what's going on with this generation, there are so many stereotypes about them. One of those being, well, this group is lazy. They're dependent. Well, that may or may not be. We don't really know yet because they haven't come out of their shell enough for us to figure that out. Why? Why don't they get out of bed in the morning? Why don't they get a job? Why don't they earn a living? Why don't they do the things that we typically think young adults should be doing? Well, it's because they don't understand who they are. There's such confusion about their identity. There's such confusion about what life is really meant to be. And what they've reverted to is narcissism, thinking that, okay, well, I don't know about the rest of the world out there, but I know that people aren't taking care of me. And I think that's their job. That's what they ought to be doing. And, so everybody's out there talking about love and compassion and service. Well, I'm the one that ought to be getting that. That's the mentality. And when you have that mentality, that's what brings up so many of these other problems. Sure, that's going to bring up fear and anxiety and depression in your life. And naturally, it's going to make building relationships difficult. And so all of these things feed on each other. An appropriate question would be the chicken-egg question. Which came first? Was it their lack of meaning and purpose, or was it their, dismissal of the value of human life, or, was it any of these other things we've been talking about? Well, it doesn't really matter because they all feed into each other. And again, I don't want to be a broken record, but it keeps going back to worldview. So in this situation, we've got to get them off of this notion that life is about them. It's difficult to do with a group. I think next we're probably going to talk about their faith issues. And one of those that we'll talk about is that they don't really believe that there is a God. And if they do believe in God, he's not the big God that you and I believe in, who created everything, who rules everything, who is involved in everything, who loves the human beings that he's created, who wants us to succeed, that's not the God that they know. And so that's got to be one of the first things that we take on, is helping them to understand, the only way out of this hole that you're in, this dark place where you dwell, is to move toward the light. And that light is God and his truth and what he wants for you.
And George, I'm holding up the book right now for anybody who's watching us on the app or our YouTube channel or Facebook. And in the title right there, Helping Millennials Thrive. This isn't a book about dunking on millennials, why, other generations are better. This is about how they got there, what other generations did that led them there, and helping them thrive. And of course, that's going to go to their worldview. That's going to go back to God. That's that hope you've already mentioned. And I love that the book has a lot of really neat graphics that make it easy to understand, a lot of charts. So you have your research and it's charts. And then there's resources, websites through the Cultural Research Center, the panel that I talked about. That's video. So if somebody is more of a visual learner, they can get on there and watch that with all kinds of neat things. And then I'm very humbled even to say you invited me to be on that panel, and you invited us that were on the panels to write in your book and to put some information in there, what we see, some of our stories. And so it really is exciting. This book has so many different resources in it for so many different folks, including millennials or those working with them or family members of them. But this idea that millennials, that young people who have children of their own now, who are teaching your children, who are running businesses or working with you, that they are lacking when it comes to meaning and purpose, and that they're telling people that in the surveys, they're kind of crying out, looking for this. What does your studies, what does your research show as you've studied, and you have studied this for so long because you have children that are millennials. This research is really kind of just the tip of the iceberg of what you've been doing with much of your life and looking into this generation. But what are you seeing are some of the causes, and how does it just become such a large issue that it has become with this looking for meaning and purpose?
Yeah, again, Isaac, there are a lot of different things that have contributed to it. One of those things is this mentality of, I'm not called to be a servant, I'm called to be served. I'm valuable enough, I'm important enough, I'm worth celebrating, and therefore you should be cognizant of my needs, my desires. My expectation is that you will take care of me. That's a no-win strategy right out of the box. But that's one that a lot of them have picked up over the course of time. Now, how did that happen? Part of that happens because as they look around at American society, that's a mentality that's been spreading like wildfire over the last 2 decades, where more and more people are feeling disconnected from each other. And it's largely because we don't hold ourselves to the same standards that we hold other people to. And then we look at the relationships, as I mentioned before, parents divorcing, their friends are divorcing, or they're not getting married, they're living with people, and of course cohabitation relationships break up more quickly even than marriages are breaking up. There's typically even greater anger in those relationships, more violence. And so all of that is mitigating against them, looking at life and saying, yeah, I can see how I add value to the big picture, how my life can have meaning if I serve others, not just sit back and wait for others to take care of me. If I recognize that I'm not in control. We talked before about anxiety, depression, fearfulness. Think about what causes that, because I'm also concerned, I think I mentioned this in the book, that our typical solution when we diagnose somebody who's wrestling with anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, whatever it may be, is to medicate them. And I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm going to give an opinion here, which is that we're prescribing drugs to deal with something that isn't a chemical problem. It's a spiritual problem. And so I would pose the possibility that the anxiety that millennials are feeling, as they described it to us, like, oh, that doesn't sound like a chemical issue, sounds spiritual. They're saying, well, I'm in charge. I'm the one who has to determine right and wrong in every situation. There's nothing to live for beyond this life. Success is based on how I feel about myself and how other people feel about me and respond to me. My purpose in life is to achieve stuff. When that's your purpose for living, your perspective on how it works, of course you're going to have anxiety and depression, because none of that is true.
And ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to move just in a moment. We'll be back and go into the fourth segment. We'll look at the final area, millennials and faith. But you can already get the flavor here. The problems that have been identified, they do have solutions. They absolutely do. It is anchored in faith. We'll talk about that.
On Stand in the Gap today, frequent guest, constitutional attorney David New, had this to say about the American Pastors Network and our media ministry.
The Ministry of American Pastors Network is very, very unique. All the host members that run the show are very devout men of God. They have all kinds of guests from different backgrounds on all kinds of subjects, but they all basically boil down to one thing. We're in the business of honoring Jesus Christ. This is a program that is worthy of your prayer support. It is worthy of your financial support. You will be blessed, and those who listen to this program will be blessed.
Thanks, David. We certainly agree. And it's why we're inviting you to tune in to Stand in the Gap today. To learn more and see the many resources we offer, visit our website at standinthegapmedia.org. That's standinthegapmedia.org.
Does your child struggle to learn in a traditional classroom setting? Do you find yourself wishing you could spend more time interacting with and training them in the ways of the Lord? Thousands of parents feel the same way, and that's why they've chosen to educate their children at home. This gives them the tremendous opportunity to not only ensure a biblical worldview education, but to instill Christian values and build stronger relationships along the way. If this sounds like something you're looking for, why not consider BJU Press Homeschool Resources? BJU Press offers a variety of programs tailored to meet your family's needs and accommodate your child's learning style. Their curriculum was created to challenge your child to think biblically and grow in godly wisdom while receiving an academically sound education. They offer traditional homeschool textbooks, online classroom, and distance learning. Take charge of your child's future by using BJU Press materials. Learn more at bjupress.com. That's bjupress.com.
Here's Twyla Braze with today's Health Freedom Minute.
Do not be assured by your data being de-identified. De-identified data under the HIPAA de-identification standard or limited dataset standard could be re-identified, according to federal officials. This fact is tucked away in the middle of a rule modifying HIPAA that you've probably never read. Also, once your data is de-identified, whatever HIPAA protections exist, which are very few, they no longer protect your data. In short, once your data is de-identified, once either 16 or 18 identifiers are removed, HIPAA permits your data to be shared broadly, giving more and more people the opportunity to re-identify the data and figure out it's you. Share this information to help us expose HIPAA.
Help us secure health freedom for all. Visit cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
I'm Ruth Kramer with Mission Network News. It was bad enough when the United States hastily withdrew from Afghanistan, leaving $7 billion worth of military equipment to the Taliban. Now, like helping a little brother, the Taliban in Afghanistan is sharing their new military toys with the Taliban in Pakistan. Nehemiah with FMI says the results have been disastrous as fighters attack police, citizens, and minority Christians. Yet the gospel can change the hardest hearts. Pray for the Taliban in Pakistan to have encounters with Jesus. And Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in a person's mind, but it's the purpose of the Lord that will stand." When Farms International began in 1967, it had a straightforward strategy, strengthening the global church through locally operated small business revolving loan programs. While Farms faithfully continues that mission today, the Lord's expanding their horizon. Farms began a new advisory role. Learn more and connect with Farms at missionnews.org. Mission Network News is a service of One Way Ministries. I'm Ruth Kramer.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today. For more information, visit our website at standinthegapradio.com.
Well, we've covered 3 areas contained in the book that we're talking about today, Helping Millennials Thrive, Practical Wisdom for a Generation in Crisis, compiled, put together by George Barna and those he is with at Arizona Christian University. And we are going to tell you in a moment. Actually, I'm going to tell you right now. I'm going to ask George right now. George, where can people find this book? Multiple places, I'm sure, but just give us a couple places where they can find this book.
Well, I know they can get it from Amazon. I believe Walmart's carrying it. They could always use the link on our website to get it, which is at culturalresearchcenter.com. So it should be readily available. And, of course, any Christian bookstore, if they're not carrying it, they could order it.
Okay, excellent. And we'll give that again, ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude. But going into this last area, not only does our millennial generation face crisis in nearly all areas of importance, we've talked about them, relationships, mental health, meaning and purpose in life, very basic things. They also face an existential crisis, according to this research, in the area of faith. Well, in fact, it's this area of faith, or perhaps lack of faith, or different interpretation of faith, that according to the release by this new book, it says that a record-breaking 40% of young adults identify as don'ts, meaning they claim that they don't believe, don't know, or don't care whether God exists. Well, that right goes to the heart of faith, doesn't it? So for those of us who understand true saving faith through Jesus Christ alone, we know that it's at the end of the day, it's not faith that makes the difference, as so much of the world thinks. It's the object of our faith. You can have faith in a rock, but what's that going to do for you? You can have faith in a cloud, but what's that going to do for you? But faith in Jesus Christ, now that is totally different. So, George, let's go here. This area of millennial faith crisis. Again, we've been kind of talking around it. You mentioned it last time in the last segment, but is this one? It's number 4 the way we've addressed it, but in some respects, it kind of undergirds all of the other ones, doesn't. So, build out this concept of faith, and how is it that this millennial generation can claim, as much research, yours and others would say, so many people, 90% or more, say they have faith, but they don't have the kind of faith that keeps you strong in the tempest. So build this out a little bit, please.
I mean, you're exactly right, Sam. This really is the root problem. If we had limited time and resources and wanted to help millennials, where do we start? I'd start with the faith issue. Now, that may not be possible because as you build a relationship with them, they may be so focused on their lack of purpose in life, or maybe the mental health frailties that they're struggling with, or the relational issues that they're challenged by. Maybe that's where you've got to start, and that's fine. But ultimately, if you don't address the faith issue, you're not going to solve any of these issues. That's the root issue. You can come up with temporary solutions, little patches that you can put on the other injuries that they're dealing with, but those are going to be temporary and ultimately ineffective unless you go back to this. Why? Because this is the foundation of everything. This gets back to the whole issue of worldview. Why do we keep coming back to worldview? Because every decision you make, and you think about these problems that we've talked about, they're making a lot of decisions about how to build relationships, who to build relationships with, when are they going to seek relationships, how are they going to fortify those relationships, or mental health. What's causing those anxieties is some of the decisions they've made. How are they going to address those things? And it goes on. Everything that we're talking about comes back to the choices that they're making. But every choice that they make is made through the mental, emotional, and spiritual filter that we call their worldview. And so if they've got problems, it's just like America. America doesn't have a political crisis. It has a worldview crisis. We don't have an economic crisis. We have a worldview crisis because all of the political and economic choices that we made, which are causing distress and harming people, it's because of the decisions that we made in those realms, but those decisions are based on the worldview. So it all comes back ultimately to worldview. Now, where's the worldview of this generation? Only 2% have a biblical worldview. And why is that? Because when you look at how a worldview develops, they didn't get the resourcing that they needed. For the most part, almost none of the millennials that we identified or interviewed around the world had a mentor, a spiritual mentor, or a discipler, somebody who knows and loves God, who's maturing in their faith, and who could answer the questions or address the challenges from a biblical point of view that millennials are wrestling with. We found that they didn't have adequate role models. You know, obviously they had role models, but they looked to their parents. Their parents weren't discipling them. I mean, we have the evidence of that in the data. We know that they really weren't being discipled at churches. Even if they regularly attended a Christian church, we tend not to disciple children in Christian churches. You know, we can look at how their parents raised them. They basically subcontracted the kids out to other professionals to do various tasks in their life. And then you look at what these young people picked up from the thing that they've spent the most time with in their entire life, and that's media, arts and entertainment media. And so you look at the messages that were sent to them through the movies, the TV shows, the songs, the video games. And it's not stuff that clarified the role of Christ in their life. It's not messages that elevated the truth and the importance and the centrality of biblical teaching. It tore it down. And so what they're left with today is the weakest of foundations on which they built a worldview, which for the vast, vast majority, more than 9 out of 10 millennials, their dominant worldview is syncretism, which is even inherently contradictory. It doesn't even make sense when you look at all the things they believe. It's in conflict with itself. So you can understand why young adults are in such distress without that biblical worldview.
And George, as you say, this is the root problem. This is where it all starts and where we're headed towards to see them thrive, to reach that. What, again, could you maybe kind of summarize the cause and effect here? You know, what caused this? And in your book, what some of the wisdom is that those who are, maybe you yourself are a millennial, you're going through this. I have 2 friends, two young men, millennials, who I knew, one of them very, very closely, who took their own lives just in the last few weeks. This is a major, concern. There's major problems that they're looking for help in these. They have these 4 different crises. But what wisdom can we give for those who are deprived of this true faith and the knowledge of the Lord?
Well, basically what you're asking me, Isaac, is how do you disciple somebody? In your chapter in the book, it talks about what do you do with a generation that rejects absolute moral truth. Gets back to that whole thing about, well, you know what, you got to come alongside them, and you're going to have to invest time and energy in their lives. That means that you're going to have to sacrifice some other things in your life to be their friend, to be there for them. And what do you do when you're with them? A lot of it's got to be listening. Just hear their pain, hear their struggles, hear their challenges. Let them talk about it. Ask questions about it. You need to know those things so that you can really deliver the goods biblically that will help them. And when you do that, it's not just going back and quoting Bible verses and saying, well, you're a fool if you don't do this because, look, it's right here in the red letters. Well, no, what we got to do is have these kind of Socratic conversations where we're asking them what they believe, why, how that's working, and then proposing other options and discussing that with them, modeling it for them, and then holding each other accountable to live that way.
And ladies and gentlemen, there it is. We have needs all around us. If you know the truth, you are, in fact, part of the solution. If you're quiet, you're a part of the problem. Let's take the truth of God's Word, share it boldly with those around us. Thanks for being with us today.
If you like today's program, tell a friend. You'll also want to hear Stand in the Gap Weekend and watch the nationally syndicated Stand in the Gap TV program. We present the news of the day truthfully, carefully, and consistently from a biblical worldview and constitutional perspective. If you're hungry for the truth, visit standinthegapmedia.org to find all our programs and the stations that carry them. While you're there, be sure to download our free app and support this ministry with your best financial gift. Then join us again right here Monday through Friday for another program of Stand in the Gap Today.